Quorum being present, we'll call the meeting to order at 6:03.
Behind the pole.
Mr. Sturgis is gonna come move it out.
We can stand while we wait for the flag.
Presentation of
Here we go. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Good evening, everyone. Some new faces: Mike Valenzola, Chair of Tantasqua; Megan Cunningham next to me, Chair of the Union 61 Committee. Good evening and welcome. First item on the agenda is approval of the minutes from the regular session, May 23rd, 2022. I'll entertain a motion to approve as presented.
So moved.
Motion's been made by Mrs. Randall.
Second.
Seconded by Mrs. Noyce Miller. Is there discussion? No discussion. The chair calls for a vote. All those in favor of the motion will say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Are there any abstentions? One. Just one?
Sarah? What? Who abstained? Me. Sarah.
Okay. Motion carries. Next, we will go to the FY23 calendar changes.
Which you don't have in the packet, it's just a verbal presentation / request.
Got something.
No, you're on TM now.
That's fantastic.
You have to do it? So I am requesting, I'm sorry, Pat, if you don't have the draft. Okay. Sorry, folks. We, as you all know, we are in the middle of, not even in the middle, we're at the starts of implementing PowerSchool as our new student information system. Everything is going fine. Shortly, we'll probably have our first interaction with the high school scheduling staff to start building next year's schedule. And we committed that it would be the end of the year before the overall staff needs to get in there and start getting comfortable. With that in mind, knowing that's coming, we need to be cognizant and understand staffing time and ability to get training in. So I am asking for an additional early release in the current fiscal year on June 5th, Monday, June 5th, which is the day after graduation, so that's over with the intention of having that afternoon be targeted for professional development and training on the new computer system, the new student information system. So that is something I think would be very appreciated and helpful with the staff and take a little bit of the edge off with them worrying that we're just gonna throw them into the fire and think that they're gonna know how to use the new system.
All right, so first I'll entertain a motion to approve the recommendation of the calendar change by the superintendent.
So moved.
Second made by Mr. Haggerty, seconded by Mrs. Noyce Miller. Discussion, questions?
Is a half a day long enough?
Well, it's long enough.
Sorry, we're going through it.
Are
you sure?
It's long enough for starters. We'll be talking soon about fiscal '24.
Okay. Is that enough time?
Further discussion? The motion on the floor is approval of the superintendent's recommendation to make a half-day on Monday, June 5th. Seeing no further discussion, the chair will call for a vote. Those in favor of the motion will say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Any abstentions? Motion carries unanimously.
Thank you.
Now we will move to the approval of the proposed 23-24 calendar.
So that you do all have in your packet, and if you've taken a peek yet, it's a little different than what we've done for a number of years, primarily because of the PowerSchool implementation. But I will say going forward, I've heard an interest from our administrators as well as staff in having more than just one day before school opens to have professional development, get back into their classrooms, get them set up. We're always pretty tight. We try and have a morning program here when it's been Monday, and staff are pretty anxious to get back to their buildings. So for next year, for sure, we are asking that we front load and that both Monday and Tuesday be staff only to give us some extra PD time. That would trade off, notice we're not looking for a full day, in January, as we have in the past. So we wanna front load them there. January already has 2 holidays, plus that is typically when high school's changing their semesters, and that involves some other half days. The rest of the calendar, I think, looks fairly typical to what you've seen before, but it's really trying to front load as much professional development time as possible.
With that, I'll entertain a motion to approve the proposed 23-24 calendar.
So moved.
Second.
Motion's been made by Mrs. Leo, seconded by Mr. Haggerty. Discussion. Any questions for the superintendent? Seeing none, the chair will call for a vote. Those in favor of the motion will say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Abstentions? The motion carries unanimously. That brings us to the FY '24 central office budget. First and foremost, this is has been reviewed by the budget subcommittee. It's a recommendation of the budget subcommittee, so we'll bring that to the floor as a recommendation. And before I open the floor for discussion, I'll let Mrs. Boyd speak to the budget.
Yep, great. For those, there's a few of you that are totally new to this process. You'll see the document is a 4-page document. The first 2 are the overall quickest snapshot at looking at current line items. I know. The bane of our existence, sorry. Oh, I'm not going down that hole. So shows the current year and what we're looking for next year, and then breaks out Tantasqua's share, and then last column there is the total Union 61 share. By the time you get to the last 2 pages, we're breaking that Union 61 share into 5 more pieces, which is what all elementaries will see when we get out to you in January as your share of this total budget. When we get down to the bottom of page 2 and 4, we do try and present to you what the overall impact to your budget alone will be. But when I look at the overall, if you can see on page 2, I know the deep breath is, oh no, a 6% increase. So we are asking for a 6% increase. If you look deeper into this, we're really asking for almost a level budget with just one return position that, for those of you who were here, central office cut a position back in March of 2020, which was a coordinator of student support services. I have included the job description that we are hoping to get back. We took that cut when we shut down and we were trying to get budgets, and everyone fully expected the sky was falling in, and your towns thought they were gonna get a 20% cut in Chapter 70. So we made that reduction. In the end, the cuts did not come, and instead federal funds came to help us get through the next couple of years. What happened when we reduced that position is the rest of us took it on. Jody and Brenda Looney, who is not here tonight, and myself took on most of these duties, and they've increased. As you can see, we're really trying to make sure we're dealing with the compliance pieces that are just exponentially increasing. I'm asking to get that position back because it's time, and we're really struggling to meet all of our compliance needs. But on top of that, as you can see in here, Brenda Looney is retiring in June, which is breaking my heart, but she has given this district, and I will ask her to come hopefully for you all to give our farewell in your May meeting. Brenda has been with us for close to 35 years. She has, with the exception of the very first Pathways program, she has overseen and implemented all of the additional in-district programs that we have in all of the various buildings, has done a wonderful job for us. The knowledge and history that she has is actually gonna be impossible to replace. I am very nervous about just bringing in a special ed director in our very complicated district. Never mind the additional stuff that she's taken on the last couple of years when we reduced this position. So that's really the crux of the increase here, that I think is important enough for us to get back in, that if we need to be squeezing other places, we will look at them. But I think that position is crucial to get back in to help us with the transition that we're about to have. Other than that, as you can see, these are, for the most part, just level funded or meeting the contractual salary increases.
Mrs. Noyes Miller, anything to report on behalf of the Budget Subcommittee?
I would say the most telling thing about putting this position back in was Michael had asked Deb at our subcommittee meeting if it got to the point, when we're doing the budget in January or before the public hearing in March, and if we needed to make some reductions to the budget, would she take this position out? And she said no. She would find someplace else to, if we have to reduce items, to do that, and not this position. So I think it's advisable that we fill it and vote this budget, and if she feels that strongly about it, we need to get it back in. And it was a unanimous vote of the budget subcommittee.
Further discussion, Mr. Haggerty?
Deb, could you share with us that, I know from things that I've read that, like, homelessness is an issue. It's growing in our district as it is in every other school district, and that someone's gotta pick up the responsibility. Could you share with us maybe some of those responsibilities that have been picked up by you people as opposed to, you know?
Sure, and a lot of it, unfortunately, Brenda used to sit in the place that the position that was cut sat, so I think just by physical location and knowing some of it, she took in a lot, because we have a hard time, we need to remind people regularly, homelessness is not special ed. Foster care is not special ed. Bullying is not a special ed thing, but we have Brenda in charge of the Title IX, of Title IV investigations. So, the homelessness has increased, and it is always a struggle of trying to figure out both how to serve them, figure out where they came from, what they have. They're usually new to our district, or they're in the district, and then we're trying to figure out how to keep them here despite them being displaced. The same thing is true with the foster placements. It is a question of managing both what do these students need for education, how do I work out the transportation, and then sometimes there's certainly food services that we're trying to work with and make sure that we're getting everything filled out to get them all every service that they can get. And it involves a lot of other community outreach, contacting the families, knowing where they're at, what their needs are, and providing whatever resources the community might have to offer.
I know I've been getting communiques from the Social and Emotional Learning Association, and I know that that the numbers are escalating
Yeah.
throughout the state.
You bet.
And, you know, I think we need to have someone there to work with those kids. One of the interesting things about the MASC conference, one of the speakers spoke to the idea that COVID's over and we're back to normal. And we hear that a lot from our kids. It's great, we're back to normal. But the reality is we're not. And we got a lot of kids out there who are struggling, and some adults, to be frank, as well. So I would strongly advocate for the position.
Thank you, Mr. Haggerty. Further discussion? Yes.
I just wanted to add, I don't know if everybody understands that with a homeless family, they're allowed to start immediately. They walk in the door and they start right then, they don't have to wait. So we often don't have background information, their health information, so Brenda was key in working through that once they started with us and getting a team together at each school to make sure the families had what they needed. She did a great job.
It does.
It
It
will till
while to come.
the end of the fiscal year.
The good news is she's not leaving the state, and I know where to find her. And she's put so much into this district, there's no way she's gonna want any of these things to fall off, so she'll be around and helping us with that.
Further discussion? All right, seeing none, the chair will call for a vote. We are voting on the Budget Subcommittee recommendation of a central office budget for $1,712,597. All those in favor of the motion will say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Abstentions? Motion carries unanimously.
So along that line, I have one more ask of support. Knowing that the transition is absolutely gonna be a challenge for all of us. I am hoping, I think the ideal transition model would be if I can squeeze a little bit of money from all 6 ESSER grants, I could bring this position in say March or April, and Brenda can spend that time saying, here, let me get this out of my head and let that person get on an orient, and then in June, hopefully by then we'll have a replacement for the actual special ed director. She can then work on concentrating on really the special ed services and getting someone new and transitioned. So I think I'd like a vote of support for that.
I'll entertain the motion. Motion's been made by Mrs. Noyes-Miller, seconded by Mrs. Randall. An endorsement of the transition plan that Mrs. Boyd just outlined. Those in favor of the motion will say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Abstentions? Motion carries unanimously.
And I think, in full disclosure, just so you, especially on subcommittees, might see, as a result, we'll probably do a little bit of central office restructuring a little bit. I think Jody will be spending a lot of time with the new special ed director and this new position, and therefore some of her duties, such as bylaw and policy, she may pull out and move on to Steve. And Steve may pick up some things that he has not done this year, which will probably have us putting facilities under the technology director, and just to kind of move around and make sure that we don't have anything falling through the cracks, and we can keep managing it all.
Great. Takes us to October 1 enrollment figures.
You just have the annual pretty, did everybody have the pretty color print? You never know if they do. Which there's really no rhyme or reason to the colors, but that is your first look at, what funding we'll be looking at from a state perspective next year is based on your October 1 enrollment. The other things I look at is I look right in the middle for Tantasqua folks, but it really affects everyone. In the middle, when we look at the 23 Tantasqua percent share versus 22, I can see which towns may or may not be struggling to fund their share after minimum contribution. As you can see, Wales is gonna have an uptick, and Brimfield's almost identical. Holland's got a little bit of an uptick, and Sturbridge has got a little bit of a decrease. So those are just things I look at and have in the back of my head. And then 3/4 of the way down, where you see Union 61 versus FY 22, those are the numbers you just saw on the central office budget, is the percent share of the central office budget that you'll be getting, and you'll see that in your budget when we start rolling those out in January. So that's just an overall look at our district. Total enrollment up 11, that 3548 to 3559. That is primarily, it is all actually in the elementary end, which there's a little uptick. Some of it is still homeschoolers coming back to us. But we did have a number of years that we had pretty low enrollment, and we're ticking up a little bit. Tantasqua's total enrollment down about 50, which we've been talking about that bubble working its way up and is starting to hit up there. So none of it dramatic, but it is things we've been looking at for a while, and we'll use this tool in projecting budgets as we build them.
Any questions on the enrollment figures?
First, we'll do the retirement,
Yeah.
which is very quickly.
Retirement, which we
Yeah,
already
you
kind of.
have the letter. I just
alluded
did
to.
wanna put out, my intention is to come out of the gate right after the January 1st holiday and get that posted. I think I would love to have a committee that involves at least a school committee member. We'll have, a central office representative, a principal, and I'll probably look to get a parent from one of our, special ed parent advisories. But if you have extra interest in this, let me know, and we'll keep you posted. If you'd like to be on a search committee, let me know.
Great.
And the conference report was MASC.
All right, and next were conference reports. As Mr. Haggerty alluded to, some of us attended the annual MASC, Mass Association of School Committees annual conference down in Hyannis a couple of weeks ago. There was a pretty full agenda. This was the first normal conference, I'm going to use that term, since COVID. We did have a conference last year, but there wasn't a trade show, and there were a number of other things that weren't included. I thought the content this year was a little bit different, which is good. Sometimes as you've been going to these year after year, some of the sessions seem to be similar, but this year there were a lot of net new sessions. So at this time, I'm happy to open the floor to some of the members that attended. Mr. Haggerty or Ms. Lamro-Kane, anything you want to just at a high level report to the committee on?
Sure.
Oh, Mrs. Randall, I'm sorry. Oh, Mrs. Randall.
Go ahead.
I was grateful to be there. I spent full 3 days attending the workshops and meeting folks from all different parts of the state, and it was inspiring to see some of the students who were involved. And there was a lot of focus, as Mr. Haggerty alluded to, social emotional learning and the trauma-informed learning, and dealing with mental health issues, as well as implementing more equity practices and ways and models to do that, which I found really informative. And I took a bunch of notes, and a lot of the presenters also shared their slides, and so I have those up on my Google Drive, and happy to distribute them out through Brenda, the school office, for anyone who'd like to review some of the notes and ideas.
Thank you. Mr. Haggerty, Mrs. Randall, anything else you want to add? Covered it?
Well, actually,
You know Mr. Haggerty, yes.
of course he is.
Talking something to add.
When in God's name is an Irishman, never stop talking. Anyways, the conference was interesting. I didn't think the content supported the theme, which was equity. I think there could have been more content area in that particular area. The one thing that I thought was a little struggling for Deb and myself is we got there early, and both Deb and myself serve on the Mass Association of Regional Schools Board of Directors, and they proceeded at the last minute to schedule 2 sessions, and they wanted the Board of Directors present at those sessions, so we got deprived of partaking of some potentially good sessions when we sat in the room and sort of shook our head with everything they were telling us about regional schools that we already knew. But it was informative. We did have the opportunity to speak with new superintendents who were regional school superintendents who were new to the experience, and so that was very informative. The one program that I did get on Thursday was one on affinity groups, which is out of Northampton. It was interesting because they were talking about, and again, I think it was emphasized in some of the later sessions, that COVID really did take a total on a lot of people, and including staff members, including kids. The seclusion at home, the lack of social interaction, a lot of deep thinking about life and where they fit in this world. In some instances, thinking about the essence of how equal the education experience is for them. And one of the Northampton school system there has started, which I found rather interesting, what they call affinity groups. And it's sort of loosey-goosey a little bit. I was a little apprehensive about the extent that it was not structured, but they talked about, you know, people who were struggling with, you know, what they were doing and in many respects who they were as far as, you know, ethnicity and so forth, of getting together in groups and talking it through, creating bonding situations. And it was fascinating, and it was interesting too, because as I said a few minutes ago, the idea that it was loosey-goosey was a concern, and it was to some of the other people in the room who felt that when it's not structured, the potential is there to go off in all sorts of directions, and that it could not be as effective as one would hope that it would be. But it was interesting to hear about the concept, so. And then as I think all of us attended that Thursday morning session. And the gentleman who, and I forget the name of the college off the top of my head, John, it's a college that you probably would not have heard of here in Massachusetts. I think it's here. He's a president, and he William James College. I'm sure most of you, I only heard it once because I wrote a recommendation for a young woman who was going in there to become a doctor, to get her doctorate in psychology, and I didn't even know that this place existed. But they have specialized for a long period of time with the areas of psychology, and they have different degree programs. And he was the one who really talked about how people are really feeling very displaced as of COVID, and that we really are not back to normal. We're closer to it than we were 2 years and 3 years ago, but we're not there. And we need to not delude ourselves into thinking everything's done and we're back to the way it was. So that's all this Irishman has right now.
Thank you, Mr. Haggerty. Mrs. Randall,
And
anything?
I would like to touch on what Bill said, about that speaker on Thursday morning. It was our General Assembly, so everyone was gathered in the same room. And specifically what they were talking about was something called, we've heard back to basics, getting back to what we knew before and kind of simplifying what do we want to see and how are we going to accomplish it, set a goal and work towards that goal. Not just for our students, but for our staff, and especially our leaders and our own psychologists in the building. They are seeing everyone at their worst, and they're also trying to work through what they've experienced with post-pandemic PTS. And something that they touched on a lot was psychological safety. You have to feel psychologically safe in any situation, including the school that you're in, whether you're teaching, you're volunteering, or you're trying to learn or lead. And if you don't feel psychologically safe, you are an ineffective leader, whether it's the classroom, the building. They were really good. They touched on a lot of things, the culture, not being afraid to be open and honest, not having fear of not knowing what you need to do or not being right, and starting that dialogue within your community, in your building, to have those discussions. Sometimes I think we all get stuck. We want to have all the answers and we want to be right and we want to be the person to fix it. It's okay to not be that person. It's okay to work together and say, I don't know. How are we going to fix it? That's being human in today's society. So I found that really, really good. I'd like more on it. So I guess I'm a little hungry for that.
It did give me a little bit of validation because we had already come out of the gate with our back faces
Yes.
thing for the year, so I did sit there feeling a little, yeah.
It was a good,
Asked
it
if
was
they
very
wrote
simple.
Mrs. Boyd's welcoming speech. Then we found out she wrote it for them.
There you go.
No, it was a good session. I also had the opportunity, I bumped into Mr. Lucas and Mr. Starcheski, both now superintendents in other districts.
Mr. Chesky
Zangi, not Starcheski. How's he doing? Taking my best. Mr. Zangi, and we were in a couple of sessions together too, so, Tantasqua continues to be a great breeding ground for leaders and educators in other districts, so thanks for the updates. With that, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
He wants to avoid the retreat, so.
Oh.
Where is Miss Barr?
He's retreating.
She is
He's retreating.
sorely missed.
We were retreating this meeting. No, March 25th.
Yeah,
right?
so we're gonna try one more time. I think it'll probably be more of a morning as opposed to a full. But we do have a number of members that really do love the retreat, so we're gonna try and have it the last weekend, last Saturday there in March. I am going to try to get, some student presentation. We've had a couple of student groups present at PD, and we're gonna have another one in January, so I would actually love to tap on one of them and ask them to come and meet with you folks and present to you. And then we'll have a conversation around our mission and vision, and by then I hope to have gathered a good amount of data on, from activities on both the student end as well as the staff end to share with you, and hopefully come into play for us to start putting what we think our mission and vision should look like.
What time are you thinking of starting this?
Mr. Haggerty requested 6 a.m.
I know he likes to get up early.
He'll be here by 9.
No comment.
I'm thinking of nine to noon.
Okay.
We'll serve, breakfasty instead of lunch, and not worry about how many of you wanna scoot out at lunch instead of staying for the afternoon.
And I was not trying to say, I instituted it a decade ago.
I
think it's
know.
very
Did
important.
Did you say a location? I didn't hear it, I'm sorry.
I think we'll have it here at that. I think we're able, we figured out last year how to have a pretty decent, even if we take a little break across the hall. I think it worked well, especially for a half a day.
So Aruba's out.
Yeah.
Who was the gentleman that we had,
Tony Bennett, he was
Bennett.
down at the
He was
conference
At the
too.
conference too, yeah.
For a half day, I'm not sure
Yeah.
we could squeeze that all in,
he was
but
awesome.
he is wonderful, so I will keep that in mind. We did see him down there, and again, reflected a little bit on the last, cause that's 2 times he comes to talk to us.
We'll get him back.
I'm
a
going for
third.
kids this time instead of Tony, but we will get him back.
Yeah.
All right, any questions on the retreat? Everyone has the date, we'll send more information out in the coming weeks, months. All right, now I'll entertain a motion to adjourn the joint meeting only. Tantasqua members, you'll get a 3-minute recess, but then we'll expect you back here for more business. Motion's been made by Mrs. Panning. Who seconded it? Mrs. Leo? Panning and Leo beat Haggerty.
Excellent.
Sounds like a college sports event.
Thank you
All
all.
those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Thank you so much. Happy Thanksgiving. Tantasqua members. We'll call the Tantasqua School Committee meeting to order at 6:42 p.m. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. First item on the agenda is the approval of the regular session minutes from October 18th, 2022. I'll entertain a motion to approve as presented. Motion's been made by Mrs. Noyes Miller, seconded by Mrs. Randall. Any discussion? Seeing none, the chair will call for a vote. All those in favor of the motion will say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Any abstentions for the record? Motion carries unanimously. Next, I'll entertain a motion to approve and hold the executive session minutes of October 18th, 2022 as presented.
So moved.
Motion's been made by Mr. Haggerty, seconded by Mrs. Randall. Any discussion? Seeing none, the chair will call for a vote. All those in favor of the motion will say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Abstentions? Ms. Customs, do you want to abstain on this one?
No, I wasn't paying attention.
Okay.
Bad student. Bad student, I agree.
Okay. Abstention.
Sorry.
Oh, okay.
Oh, wait, executive session, you're
That's
right,
why
I
she's
have to
confused. She
abstain.
doesn't even have them in her.
Sorry,
No worries, no worries. So,
one of those days.
you're good. Motion carries with one abstention. And remember, these remain confidential and on hold, not approved for release, so they are a confidential document. We'll move to the financial report, Mr. Nimberco.
Okay, as we finish off October here, we're looking pretty good as far as percentage of expended as well as encumbered. Our revenues are a little bit behind, but that's just a timing issue with state in order to bring in our chapter 70 as well as our other revenues from them. Areas we're watching right now continue to be utilities, as well, specifically the heating utilities as we get into the colder months here. And then we always continue to watch our sped as well as our areas where we don't have a lot of control, like special ed and transportation and places like that for special ed transportation. So all in all, we're doing pretty good moving forward. You know, still early in the year, however, we'll keep an eye on it and then simultaneously working on the FY24 budget moving forward.
Questions for Mr. Nemberko? Steve? We'll move to staff reports. Mr. Sturgis?
So just a couple things I highlight from my report that's in front of you, just that we did have the Peace Poster Contest that Mrs. Willard hosts every year through the Lions Club, which they came through. Our cafeteria table was aligned with artwork from the kids who participated, which amazes me how many kids voluntarily participate. And the Lions Club folks did come through, selected the 3 winners who were pictured. Unfortunately, the young man who came in 3rd was not in that day, so he is not pictured, but he was recognized. One thing that changed in my winter athletics tryouts, boys basketball, the number of 30 kids jumped up to 56 the night before. So we had some last minute signups and physicals put in that day. And just to note, some things that are not in the report that are just currently ongoing is, if anyone came in through that entrance, you might see through the window, we have 26 Thanksgiving boxes of meals with donated turkeys and fresh produce from some of the local, McNugg's donated fresh produce and local grocery markets, and we had a food drive as well. So we were able to support 26 families in our own school community. And then we also have a toy drive that's kicking off after Thanksgiving, hosted by our Pathways folks. It started last year as a activity for our Pathways kids that turned into collecting enough toys to support 42 families down in Burgess. So it stays within our community, and just a bunch of good stuff going on around here for the holiday season.
Some nice press on the Chestnut project.
Yep,
Yeah.
Chestnut Tree Club made the Telegram Gazette. I included the article here. Mrs. Daly did inform me that they're being interviewed by Science Magazine, and she'll let me know when that is gonna come out. It hasn't taken place yet. But yeah, they're getting a lot of recognition. They had a club, a meeting today where they're out in the field in the cold weather today, and I can't believe how many high school kids still are coming back. We have our growing Chestnut Club of our kids, but the high school kids who were in that club don't go away from that club. They keep coming back. It's packed of kids. So, and there's 1 or 2 kids who Mr. Green actually wanted me to hire as substitute teachers during their college breaks who are in college and still coming back. So, it's pretty cool to see those kids I didn't know as students, but the senior class for them, these are the kids that I did have. So it's cool to see them coming back and see them out in the field. Our science classes go out in the field all the time and do some project-based learning out there. So yeah, they're doing a lot of work, and they're getting credit for it, which is really nice to see.
Great, and they have an open invite to come in and present to us at any time, so.
They will take you up on it. They love their Chestnut Club.
Thank you, Mr. Sturgis. Mr. Wood?
Just a couple quick things. Draw attention to a couple of testimonials in your report. One is from, if you look on the second page, from a satisfied customer with the electrical department and the work they've done. Right now, the electrical kids are working at the junior high doing the pole project, which is a great project for the kids and also saves the district a boatload of money, which is always good. And on the back page, it's really cool. We do the 3 to 6 month follow-up. We're in the process of doing that. And a lot of times we'll just get, so-and-so is in school, so-and-so is working in industry. But Joe Tibman's mom really went above board on her testimonial to the IT program and how it prepared him. Next month's report, I will have for you a total report on the craft fair. I don't know if anybody got to the craft fair. It was bigger than usual. Oh yeah, that's right.
It was huge.
It was bigger than usual. And the net right now is just under $12,500.
Wow.
For Skills USA. So that is a huge kudos to Mrs. Carrier, the business tech kids, who really put that together, and the staff who really come together with. We had 37 kids who were there helping the vendors in the pouring rain to bring in their supplies, and then again at night to take them out. And we have rave reviews from the vendors who always want to know when are we putting it up so they can get their applications, and they're due in June. And it's a phenomenal event, and again, Mrs. Carrier does an amazing job.
Thank you, Mr. Wood. Mrs. Fitzgerald.
With respect to the 2022 graduate follow-ups, you mentioned the Perkins scale in chapter 74. How are those used as part of that follow-up?
So,
And what are they, actually?
okay, that's a great question. So part of what we have to do under the Perkins grant is there are indicators that we have to look at. And there are two separate scales. One is the Perkins scale and one is the chapter 74 scale. Perkins is the more liberal, and so the state would like you to get 80% response rate, and it's a huge process. It's phone calls, it's emails, it's trolling social media, it's doing a ton of stuff. But on the chapter 74, if a student who graduated in the class of 2021 is working in college, in technical school, and military, that's a positive placement. And in that area, we are currently at 100%. Under the, that's under Perkins. Under chapter 74, it's a little bit more stringent because it's now working in college in your field. And again, so kids who graduated from culinary, but they're working not in culinary, that's not a positive placement. But our numbers are still significantly higher. So our kids who are committing to a particular shop or trade are sticking with it after at a really high percentage, actually higher than the state average, which is really cool. And I'll have that report. It's due to the state in March, but it takes, like I said, it is just a ridiculous amount of work to get those numbers, and that's part of how we're, I'll say, graded by Perkins to see how that goes. So, but I will have that for you all as we move forward to the spring.
Great, thank you.
My pleasure.
Ms. Joseph.
Hi there, everybody. Our feature curriculum content area is the Social Studies and History Department this year. You can read about all the neat things that they're doing and what they're up to. Our departments have been busy putting together information and illustrations and samples of all of their project-based learning for us to share with the curriculum subcommittee. So we'll be sharing that at our December meeting there. In the month of November, we had an amazing performance of Clue by our drama folks. Hopefully you had the opportunity to get there. It was absolutely outstanding, and they are currently in the countdown to revealing what their spring musical will be. So that will be very exciting when it hits. I know what it is, but I will not share it, and I think it'll be great. We've focused a lot of our energy since we last saw each other on community-based things. So like Mr. Sturgis, we also had a very successful food drive. This past Saturday, our families came to pick up the food on campus, and the last of those meals were being disseminated through pickups yesterday and today at the school building for those that were unable to make it over the weekend. We also have the toy drive taking place at the high school as well. This year, we solicited our elementary schools in order to find students in need, as well as our own. We have, we created a tree of giving. Basically, you take a star. The star has the item that is needed for people to fulfill that specific wish. So we have that taking place. We also have a children's book drive taking place to help support those students getting pediatric care at Boston Children's. That's something our kids, I always mess up the order, but it's Kids Cancer First. So it's for those students who are those individuals who are undergoing treatment, and that's that club that is doing that. So we have lots of great things happening to engage our community and to support our community, certainly. We also are doing some things for ourselves. We have our first pep rally taking place tomorrow since 2019. So that's exciting for our students. They're over preparing now for that. We have Spirit Week this week. Yesterday was Flannel Day. Today was Clone Day. Jake was the clone of Mr. Duncombe, right? And the entire first floor were clones of each other. And I had a few clones that wore wigs and came out and introduced themselves as the principal. So it was a pretty fun day over at the high school, and tomorrow is the Tantasqua Spirit Day. So we look forward to those community events and continuing to do things to build our culture and climate at the high school. The other thing I should mention is that we have some trips coming up that I wanted to put forward to you. Is this a good time or after?
Well, the only one on the agenda is the student council. We're
Correct.
waiting until December.
Yep.
We're gonna have another one coming to you in December. But yeah, this is absolutely the time to talk about that and get that one voted.
Yep, we can entertain that motion. Why don't you talk to us a little bit, I mean, I know about this, but.
Sure. So annually, our student council members are invited to go to the annual State Student Council Conference, which is held in Hyannis. This is a 3-day conference typically. It's been abbreviated due to COVID, with 1 day, not overnight, and this is the first time that we're seeing it be overnight again in Hyannis at the Cape Cod Resort and Conference Center. We typically have, every school is invited to have 12 students because we are a gold standard school. We learned this week that we will have the ability to invite 16 students. So that's a little bit of a change since the time I wrote this, as that's a different notification. The student council advisor goes and travels with these students. They do, as this is a hot item for students to participate in, they have an application process with an essay that is reviewed for who can go. The cost is approximately $400 per student. It's a little under that, and typically in the past, the student council has helped to pay for half of that cost for each of those students available. And those that are in, Miss Laval would be our chaperone, and she is the student council advisor. So we are hoping and looking for you to approve this trip for us.
All right, let's first get a motion on the floor, so I'll entertain a motion to approve and authorize the trip as presented by Ms. Joseph and to exempt Ms. Laval from any of the conflict of interest laws for the purposes of chaperoning said trip.
So moved.
Motion's been made by Mr. Haggerty, seconded by Mrs. Randall. Mr. Haggerty, I think you had a question for Ms. Joseph.
Yeah, I was just curious, will you be like, as the former principal, be participating in the polar plunge?
Yeah, actually, yes. So I've actually done it all throughout as the assistant principal throughout. So
You just never got any of the show for it.
maybe not, but there is definitely a picture of me dressed as one of the Despicable Me characters, heading into the water with them. I foolishly that year didn't realize that we didn't have to go under. I thought the whole idea of the polar plunge was to go under. I did. I wasn't the only one, but certainly there are people that maybe were a little bit smarter than I was and did not do that. I did put myself forward last year to go into the pool as well, because they were not having the official polar plunge, but to put myself into the pool here. Couldn't do it into bodies of water here, as it was completely frozen over at the time that they were doing this. But student council didn't meet their quota. I volunteered to do it anyway, but Miss Laval said, nope, they need to work to earn what they need to do first. So I will definitely put myself in that place. I know Stuco has to come up with a theme for it, but that's always a fun part. So I do take a venture down there with them on that first day in Hyannis to do that polar plunge with them.
Thanks, Ms. Joseph. We have a motion on the floor. Is there any discussion relative to the motion? Seeing none, the chair will call for a vote. Those in favor of the motion will say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Opposed, nay. Abstentions? Motion carries unanimously. Thank you, principals. That brings us to our committee reports. Mr. Rosen.
Hi, as we reach this midpoint of the first semester, the school and the community have made profound progress in our endeavors. Fall sports have concluded, and many teams have had great successes in their respective seasons, even progressing well into the playoffs. And as we return from this midpoint respite, another enduring and prosperous season of winter sports will begin. The performing arts have also had great success with their production of Clue, as Ms. Joseph mentioned. Most clubs by now have begun meetings, and many are well into their various activities. For instance, the Diversity Club recently hung posters up for for Disabilities Month, which is, the posters are one of many ways in which we promote inclusivity. Perhaps most prominently, the yearbook club and the class have been going around and interviewing students and teachers and everything. More so now, you notice because people are getting pulled out of class, or they're running around the lunchroom and they have like a press credential on and everything. So that's a good way to, so the coveted yearbook is being put together right now. Finally, the Connections program is preparing for its annual round of health class presentations to freshmen on topics of diversity. And they were one of the groups that presented during the Professional Development Day. So they're quite active in that realm, presenting and whatnot. The NHS and Student Council have produced many successful initiatives as of late. The National Honor Society wrapped up its annual food drive, which Ms. Joseph mentioned, which will feed upwards of 16 families this year. Right around the same time, they also had they sold pies at the craft sale, and they made a good profit, which will go towards scholarships in the spring. Student Council's joint shoe drive with the Rotary Club is concluded, and we collected upwards of 171 pairs of shoes, which will be regifted or used for construction projects. So we had a success, and we're hoping that it can carry on in future years. Also, the Student Council attended the Fall Regional Conference last Thursday, which is very similar to the conference in March, but on a smaller scale because they break it down into regions. So, about 30 councils will go to each conference. There's a central one, a western one, and so forth. So the regional conference happened just recently, and we brought around 24 delegates. So that was wonderful. And right now we also have our toy drive. So we'll be collecting toys for select families and whatnot. So that's underway, and hopefully we'll have a success with that as well. And as Ms. Joseph mentioned, we have our pep rally tomorrow, which is significant because it's been 3 years. So we're all excited for that, and that also kind of represents normalcy, so to speak. And then also in the next few weeks, we have the Student Council will be collaborating with NHS and Art Club for the second year now to create holiday cards, also in partnership with Rotary, that will be given out to 400 seniors and housing authorities in the surrounding communities. So we did that last year, and that was successful, and we almost got to 400, but this year we're going to have a meeting on the 1st, a meeting on the 8th, and we'll be doing it during advisory too, and then during the day of service that Student Council does with the junior high on December 3rd, which is also something that Student Council is preparing for next weekend. And then also as Joseph mentioned, our Cancer Kids First Club is collecting books for our children at Boston Children's Hospital. So together with all of these myriad activities, we have a lot of community service going on, and we're having a lot of participation. So that's good as well. And then with academics, clubs and activities and athletics well underway, the next few weeks are sure to be laden with successes, of which I look forward to updating you on. Thank you.
Thank you.
Report.
Just a note before you leave, anyone who wants tickets to the game Thursday,
I have them.
Ms. Joseph has them.
I have it's a pass for you and +1.
Mrs. Noyes Miller, budget.
Gave my report at the joint meeting, so I have nothing else other than our annual budget review. First meeting is January 28th at 9 a.m. here at the school, right here.
Thank you, Mrs. Noyes Miller. Technical, Ms. Custance.
We meet actually on the 30th, it's actually Eli, he's the chair, I'm sorry, I stepped, should I have said that, I'm sorry. But we do meet on the 30th, correct?
Yes, it's posted.
It is posted that we're meeting on the 30th.
Curriculum, Mrs. Barnacle's not here. Penny, are you reading the report?
I'm gonna do my best.
All right.
Will not do,
Take it away.
justice to what Pat typically does. So we met back in October, and our two big topics of conversation were the implementation of a new math program, EdGems, which the teachers are participating in, and this will help with the transition from junior high, or from elementary school to junior high to the high school. It's a much more structured program, and will help get the sixth graders ready for the junior high. The course names and levels are also going to be changing, along with the ability to be more aligned. So sixth graders will soon be using EdGems as well, and the leveling of classes will hopefully be more challenging for our kids. It's a 3-year program, and will be very consistent with students' abilities and able to identify the different levels that our students are at. So that's EdGems. And the other topic was our foreign language program. Was that a no?
It's a groan.
So yeah, so that grown, as a parent who is signed up for the French program, yeah, it's a, ooh. We have 48, so we don't have a French teacher currently, with all of Miss Joseph's searching high and low and reaching out to 1 million or so people to try to teach the program. We were unsuccessful, so we are having a Sterling Academy, which is an online service, which is providing our students who signed up for French. They had an option to continue with French or to switch classes. We have 48 students who are currently enrolled for French this coming year. 26 students are enrolled, 19 are currently taking French 2 in DLOC. So the program works with the students on an individual piece. If they get frozen or are missing 3 assignments, or if they're missing 3 assignments, they get frozen, so they're in the library, I believe you said?
With our VHS classes are located in the library.
Yeah, so they are in there, currently taking classes. This is the only year we're offering this right now for, with Sterling Academy. It had a few bumps along the ways to get started, but we're assessing the program and hopefully finding some others to work on, to take French, or offer a second foreign language. Right now, we also have Latin and Chinese and German. We have 2 students who are taking Latin, 2 taking Chinese, and 1 taking German. We have 23 sections of Spanish currently, so Spanish obviously is the more popular choice currently, but we do want to offer a second language next year. Sign language is a possibility of something that could be offered. We're sending out a survey to find out what the students might be interested on, and really we would like something that is project-based learning or problem-based learning. So having lots of possibilities, but struggling a little as the foreign language teachers out there are a minimum, and coming here, finding one in our area. And as I mentioned, Lee did a lot of outreach and even was talking to other schools about sharing or doing a co-op program with them, but unsuccessful. So those are our 2 big items. Did I miss anything?
Any questions from Mrs. Panic?
I was like, no one else I think was there. Michelle, you were there. I was like, no one else is there.
I was there.
It was great. Anything to add?
No, great job.
Next meeting's December 12th, yes?
Yes. Yes. December 12th. Yep, February 6th, April 10th.
All right, thank you, Mrs. Panic. Mrs. Fitzgerald,
Yes.
you came with a lot of gifts.
I know. Always, Mr. Valenzola. We have 17 gifts for you today. And what I would like to do with the chair's indulgence is to discuss all of them and then take them as one motion. So, starting off with policy JICA, student dress code. I think many of you may be surprised that we have a brand new policy before you. This is the only new policy in the packet for the student dress code, because we all know we have discussed the student dress code in the past. But the dress code that we have discussed is located in our handbook. And while that has the force of policy behind it, we are endeavoring right now to make sure that our bylaws and policies align with our handbook, so we don't have any ambiguity or contradiction between those two statements. So in our handbook, we do have a very detailed dress code recommendation. What you see before you as JICA is a more general foundation for the policy that is set forth in the handbook. And you'll see that it's more broad than what you'll see in the handbook, so that we can make changes to the handbook as necessary without having to change this more general policy. I will say that I would like to make an amendment, a verbal amendment. You'll notice throughout this packet that we have a number of policies where the legal references to the acts of 2022, Chapter 117, and we have included here the actual web page. I would like to delete that web page site from all of these policies, because it no doubt will be changing or non-functional very soon. Any questions about JICA? Next, we have policy JAC, non-discrimination. Two changes to this policy. The first bold paragraph you'll see is simply adding language to address the prohibition against retaliation for anyone who may be filing a claim of discrimination within our schools. Below that, you will see a star with respect to race. And what happened as of July of this year, the legislature approved an expansion to areas upon which we cannot discriminate. And this particular expansion applies to prohibiting discrimination on the basis of natural and protective hairstyles. And so you will see throughout this packet that we have added that language. Specifically, race now includes traits historically associated with race, including but not limited to hair texture, hair type, hair length, and protective hairstyles. And that applies, there's particular language in the act about athletics in particular, not discriminating against students in terms of athletic gear and attire on the basis of particular hairstyles. And you'll also see the cross-references have been amended to account for these two particular revisions. Any questions? Okay, next, we have policy DB, annual budget. This is one of several policies you will see in the packet that stems from the state's recent review of district finance policies for emergency relief grant funding, and questions that arose regarding the role of school committees in grant approval and signature of warrants. This particular policy, you'll see, adds much more particular language explaining what the foundation budget is, how it relates to our district agreement, and the apportionment between our 5 towns. You confused, Mr. Valenzuela? I see you questioning.
No, I
Oh,
just,
right.
I thought I heard multiple phones going off at once. I
Oh,
was
okay.
worried you were getting a storm.
So you'll see we added paragraphs 3 and 4, so it's a much more detailed and expanded version of our more general language on the annual budget. Any questions there? Policy DBC, budget deadlines and schedules. A very simple amendment here. We are moving towards statewide, a term of art, select board will now become the term of art used as opposed to board of selectmen. But not all of our 5 towns have adopted that change as of yet. So you will see in this policy we have changed selectmen to select board / board of selectmen of each member town. And we took out some unnecessary language there at the bottom.
But that does require a vote at the local level.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, so some of our towns, I think 4 out of our 5 towns have already taken that vote.
I imagine which one didn't.
I
but
wonder.
we expect that will follow.
As chair of the Charter Review Committee, we have not taken a final vote.
Well, then 2 have not.
2, okay, 2. Next, we have policy DBD, budget planning. We've tried to streamline this policy a bit. You'll see that our original policy actually placed on the school committee the responsibility for advanced planning and preparation of the budget. That's not really what the law requires. That's really the superintendent's role. So we've adopted language that reflects that the superintendent is the one responsible for the overall budget preparation and planning, and that the school committee simply votes on that. We also changed school committee to superintendent and/or designee to give our superintendent the authority to do what we have done in practice, have multiple people who are part of this process. Questions? Policy DBG, budget adoption and procedures. Very simple, it's just an update to the legal citation for regional schools 71-37. And we removed that unnecessary reference to law and agreement. Policy DBJ, budget transfer authority. Same thing, added the appropriate legal reference that applies to our regional school district.
Do you want the wording in the first paragraph to be superintendent or designee?
In keeping with as they are recommended by this. Well, the superintendent will always make the recommendation.
Okay.
The designees are those who help with preparation, so I think we're fine keeping it as superintendent here. Policy DD, grants, proposals, and special projects. This was interesting, so MESC, looked at its past recommended policies and realized that in fact, its past policies and ours, which were in accordance with MESC's, allowed the district or mandated that the district shall review and approve expenditures prior, grants and gifts prior to their expenditure. Well, in fact, the law requires that we must review and approve any gift or grant prior to its expenditure. And so that language has been called out and really made clear here. The question that came up at the subcommittee was, what do we do in the summer when we have Title I funds? We have all kinds of expenditures which take place during the summer well before we meet for the year as a school committee. So the guidance that we've received from MASC and Glenn Kuchar specifically is that while the law is the law, the school committee must review and accept all grants and gifts prior to expenditure. We can approve a consent agenda at our last spring meeting, which would include and empower the superintendent to make those expenditures during the summer without having to call the school committee in or obtain a vote for every single one of those. And we'll approach that in the spring as far as how that will look, but that's how we will handle what is required under law. Perhaps at our May meeting, we will approve a consent agenda which gives our administration the authority to actually expend grants and gifts over the course of the summer. Now, the law also requires that come our next meeting, when there is an expenditure, we will get a report of that. So it's not like we're gonna be in the dark as to whether or not the summer expenditures actually matched up with what we approved in the spring. So I think we need a little more guidance on what that will look like in the spring, but it certainly is possible, because that was the concern that specifically Jody made clear. We really do spend quite a bit of money in the summer that could run afoul of this if we're not careful. Any questions on that? DGA, authorized signatures. This is another one that requires a little bit of explanation. Our current policy, and in fact the law, allows the school committee to designate by vote one person who is responsible for the review and approval of all warrants, such as the ones we all signed here tonight. And after careful consideration, the subcommittee is recommending that in fact we move to that practice pursuant to the authority granted by law, rather than have a packet passed around during each meeting or available before the meeting for signature. I think for efficiency's sake, for attention's sake, it's our recommendation that one person be designated to do that. Now, the fact that one person signed the warrant doesn't relieve any of us individually for the consequences if in fact that review and signature doesn't happen. We all remain on the hook individually as school committee members. And we certainly are able to come early, as we still can now, to review all of those documents. And at the next meeting following signature, the law requires that I think it's a record be made available at the next meeting of all that was signed, reviewed, and signed by our one designee. But again, we have two choices. We can stay with the practice that we have been following, which actually was not in line with our policy. Our actual current policy does say that the chair of the school committee or their designee or the superintendent will sign warrants, and we have chosen to adopt the policy where, a practice where we all sign. It's our recommendation that we follow the law, what the law allows, and that we move to a single signatory for all warrants moving forward.
I have a question on that.
Yeah.
Only because we in Brimfield have a single designated person. So what is the process that would need to be done in addition to? I just was confused by that.
So instead of the pile going around here tonight as it did, one person would sign all of
Well, that's
those.
what we do in Brimfield.
Right,
We already
right.
have a designate, one
Exactly,
person can
yeah.
sign it and move forward. But do we have, you said we have to present something?
No,
to-
so a record of this approval will be made available at the next regular committee agenda, which means there will be a record of what was signed, what was reviewed and what was signed,
And what I would do is actually still have the pile here.
for
So-
anyone who wants to go through it.
Oh, okay.
Someone would, it's the same thing, Jen, we just
Okay.
never put that into place for region. And actually, that legal option took a while to get through regions.
Right.
Okay.
Because there was the understanding, you've got more than one town represented, and maybe a committee is not okay
Right.
with having one member. So it was a lot easier to implement for the elementary, and having those bills there is the proof, the record of what's been approved and signed. Anyone else that chooses to review them can do so, they can even sign them, but
Mhm.
Gives you, if, more importantly, sometimes if off-cycle or over the summer, we get a signature, we still would bring those bills to the next meeting and make sure they're available for anybody that wants to look at them.
Okay.
But yeah, it really is doing what's been
Okay.
already
I was like,
happening in the
oh,
elementary.
Yeah.
So is this a named individual or is it a named role? So like, would it be like the chairman or the head of a certain committee, or are we gonna name a particular person?
The law says we vote on a single member. That member can be a title, it can be the chair, but it is that the committee vote on a single member who will fill that role.
But authorized signatures is bigger than just the warrant.
Yes, and in fact,
So-
you'll see there's gonna be another policy coming up about payroll, and that the same suggestion or recommendation is being made there.
Well, no, I
But-
mean, I signed everything central office for you.
Again, if
That
payrolls and
covers that.
warrant, there's payroll warrants and there are accounts payable warrants. I think that's all we're
That's all,
talking
that-
about.
that's all this
There's
addresses.
tons of other things, rate sheets and isn't operational. But there certainly are other legal documents that we need the chair to sign, and I wouldn't think that will change. I think this is about processing accounts payable and payroll.
This is, yeah, this is limited, and I think
Yep.
it's, clear, one's warrants, one's gonna be specifically payroll, so. And we can, I mean, if you're concerned, we can change that title, authorized signatures for warrants, the other one would be authorized signature for payroll, but, I think the language limits it.
Yeah.
I think Mass recommends a backup person as well, if the
An alternate,
signatory,
yeah,
an alternate, right.
yeah. You can see right down in that policy, Mr. Chair, the treasurer and the assistant treasurer are authorized to sign bank forms, so that they're carving that out, from this particular person. Any additional questions on that policy? All right, policy DI, fiscal accounting and reporting. We changed the word school system to school district, and we corrected citations and legal references. No questions? Moving on. Audits, policy DIE. Again, this was part of this statewide review of all finance policies, and really what the additional language you see here does, it includes very specific language about the period during which audits must be performed, and it updates the cross-references. It's, I think the push was to really make the policies clear on their face to anyone who might be looking at them, what the financial requirements are for the district. our initial policy was very general and lacked this specificity. So we recommend moving to the more complete language recommended by MASC here. I do note that in the second bold paragraph where we have chair of the select board, I do think we have to go to chair of the select board / board of selectmen to be consistent. Any questions on audits? Policy DJE. Very simply, you can see we've corrected the purchase limits and citations to reflect the current law under the state purchasing law with a new legal citation. Questions? Policy DK, payment procedures. This is, as I noted earlier, the same as policy DGA, the authorized signatures. Same thing here, that the committee is permitted by law to designate by vote a single member to be responsible for the review and approval of payroll warrants. I will note we have two, I'm gonna call them typos, with our amendment. If you look at the second paragraph where we have in parentheses, this paragraph was moved up. I think we should take that out. That's a notation just for the committee. And the next paragraph, the first sentence, as an operating procedure, the committee will receive monthly lists of bills, warrants. You can see that's contained already in the bold-faced amendment listed below. So that's a redundancy that should be deleted. And then for policies GBA, GCF, JB, and JFBB-1, you will see that they are all the same amendment. It's the expanded definition of race to include and prohibit discrimination on the basis of natural and protected hairstyles. Other than that, there is no change to any of those policies. I will again request that the reference to the specific website under Acts of 2022, Chapter 117, be deleted to be consistent throughout this packet. The rest of those policies remain unchanged from their current form. And therefore, Mr. Chair, the subcommittee moves the full committee to either adopt or amend these 17 policies on first reading, as just noted, starting with policy JICA and ending with policy JFBB-1.
Motion is a recommendation of the bylaw and policy subcommittee, so we'll bring it to the floor for discussion. Discussion. Mrs. Noyes-Miller, as the budget subcommittee, reviewed the policy proposals that impact the budget.
Same on bylaw and policy, yes. The full committee has not reviewed it, only bylaw and policy.
Budget
But it does
subcommittee.
not, but the chair is on it.
Right,
Yes.
but the budget subcommittee has not reviewed these policies.
I think they should.
Okay. If that's the wish of the committee.
I think it would make sense for pretty significant procedural changes that impact the subcommittee, for that subcommittee to have a point of view on it as a whole. Is there any objection to tabling the motion?
The whole motion, or amend?
Want to
Well,
carve
which
out
ones
the
are you
finance
tabling by?
The ones
motions?
that impact the
The
budget, so
So it's beginning with D.
about 7 of them.
Yes, that would be
Most
DB,
of them are housekeeping
DBC.
other than the signature situation.
Yeah,
No,
Right.
there's language changes in every one of them.
there's DB, DBC, DBD, DBG, DBJ,
J,
DD,
yeah, I'm not as worried about that one.
DGA,
DGA,
DI, DIE, DJE, and DK.
yeah, those are the ones I have. I'd recommend tabling those. The budget subcommittee should set up a meeting and review them, perhaps with the chair of the bylaw and policy subcommittee
Sure.
jointly. Is there any objection to the amended motion before you to carve out those policies, table them for now, and vote on the rest? By unanimous consent, we'll accept that amendment. So I'll bring it back to the previous question as amended. All those in favor of the motion to approve or amend on first reading those policy proposals before you, with the exception of the ones we just outlined would be removed and tabled, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Motion carries. Anything else from the bylaw policy?
No, sir, you'll see there were 4 policies that were reviewed, require no action by this committee. And we are meeting again, January, prior to our next meeting.
Great. Brings us to negotiations, Mrs. Randall.
We had no meeting.
No update. Okay, building a physical plant, Mrs. Leo.
Meeting, I will be getting an email out to the members within the next week.
Okay.
Next meetings.
Brings us to communications, we've got 2 items in there, one related to a special education tuition rate hike, and the other is our E&D certification.
Yeah, and the first is just FYI, which I did send out to all school committees. As you can see, it's just an FAQ, but it is the first blow in the new fiscal year budgeting, just to say that there's been a global OSD approval of a 14% increase in the private tuition. So these are all the private tuitions, which none of which are in the Tantasqua budget, but they certainly impact Tantasqua when we're sitting at town meeting floor and you've got an elementary budget that also has to be passed in conjunction with the secondary. You have of your 5 towns, 2 that'll probably take a higher hit than the others, but it is telling here where there's a global increase of 14%, that will be pretty significant. You'll probably hear a lot of chatter at first. I think there is still a little bit of an effort to try and get them to walk that back a bit and phase in. No one's disputing that it is very hard to find. We know it is very hard to find specialized, special need teachers, support staff in all of the areas that they have, but we don't get to have a 14% increase in our budget. So there is some concern. Most folks believe that we're not gonna be able to walk that back, and there's more of a statewide effort to try and say, then give us more revenue in terms of circuit breaker or any other way to try and address what's coming here. So that is just one more area that when we start building budgets, in addition to utilities and insurances, that are gonna cause us some argita without even talking about just staffing needs. So there is an FYI, and then as you can see, we did indeed already process our financials to get E&D. The reminder it's a shock to some school districts that they can't build a budget based on E&D until you get the certification, so we're always in very good shape to make those recommendations in March. But the note here is, I will say, all of those federal grants that and state grants that needed to be spent by June 30th caught us a little bit short. We ended up 14,000 over the threshold, which we have been at about 5% of our budget as our reserve for a number of years, and it gives us comfort to be there. But anything over that 5% does go back to the towns. We do that via just reducing their assessments for the year, so they'll get a little bit less of a bill for the assessments.
So that'll increase their free cash, is that what will happen?
Next year, exactly, that money will roll into their free cash. Now, again, you take that 14,000 divided by the towns, you can guess it's not much, but that'll go back, and that's the FYI. And it is a number that we try to guesstimate come June, what it's gonna be at. We wanna make sure we're not over, but when we had grants that we had to spend by June 30th, we didn't wanna lose that money, so we ended up a little high there. That's just FYI.
Thank you, Looks good. Brings us to your report.
which really is about just, a reminder that our December meeting will be at the high school in the library, where hopefully we will have a little bit of culinary delights to snack on, but we will, just before that, you'll probably see, the posted meeting will start at 6, but we will start in the auditorium with music. I do not know yet what group will be performing, but we always have some holiday music to kick off that meeting, and then we'll go upstairs, have a little culinary, and also meet your superintendent scholars, but that will be on the regular agenda. So we'll be at the high school. Other than that, we wanna give Jody the opportunity to present the MCAS results.
Mrs. Marassa, take it away.
I'll try not to bore you with the data, but it's actually, we are in recovery. So I want to preface the presentation by saying we need to go back to 2019, which was our last full year of administration. What I mean by full year of administration, 2 sessions of math, science, and ELA were given to various groups. If you all need to also remind you that back in 2019, that was the first year that the high school transitioned from the legacy to the next generation test. So in past years, we've had accountability results. What that means is how we fared to the previous year's targets. We do not have targets this year. In fact, 2022, as a result to the disruption and interruption of test taking, has become now the new baseline for all grades, grades 7 through 10. In fact, grades 3 through 10, but in this, for Tantasqua, it's grades 7 to 10. So we are still transitioning from legacy testing, especially in high school, because this year, 2023, is really their 3rd year of full, actually, in 8th grade. The high school actually had all full tests anyway, but they just did not have consistent testing from back down in 2017 when grades 3 to 8 started. So there are some interruptions with the data, which allows us, doesn't allow us to look at cohort data very well, okay? So here's the interruption, just to give you some history, because we cannot see cohort data and we do not have targets. But there's a lot of good data to extract from what we do have. I will say that accountability percentiles, even though there's no targets, there have been accountability percentiles. Junior high school from 2019 to 2022 increased 4 percentage points. What we say by that's aggregate data. That's all students 7th and 8th grade. And during the time of COVID and illness and absenteeism, to increase your total score 14 points, double digits, it's actually remarkable. So it's extraordinary. Usually percentage points increase when we're talking about whole aggregate data is anywhere from like a 3 to 7, so it's almost doubled. So great job by the junior high to increase the overall performance in all subgroups, all students. The high school, however, we haven't had that comparability because, again, 2019 was their first test year. Our target score for all students is 500. That gets all students to the meeting and exceeding categories. We tend to group students in those 2 categories, so it goes from a 4-point scale to a 3-point scale, because once they hit that 500, we know that they are on the right track to succeeding in college, achieving the scores they need to get for graduation, all good things happening there. Here's, I start off with grade 7, so all the sheets for the most part are structured the same way. I point out some key points. The meeting and exceeding combined scores. So if you look at English language arts, the school versus the state, in grade 7, they exceeded the state for ELA. For math, though, also look at that score, exceeded the state. So that first
column is something you should take note of. The rest kind of break down the other percentages. And then you should look at the last column because it says achievement percentile. Our target score for achievement percentile is 70 or higher. So that's what we want to get. We're meeting the mark in mathematics, and ELA has some climbing up to do. But think about pandemic times. We didn't necessarily have long types of projects with extensive writing. So when we look at MCAS scores, certainly we do very well with our objective points of the test. It's when we put the writing in for 7th grade, they probably, once the writing scores get put in, they drop about 5 to 7 points. That's pretty much average in 7th and 8th grade. So we know it was a district a goal of ours to increase our writing prior to the pandemic, and now we know we just have some more work to do after the pandemic. Also on this page, if you look at the comparison, the historical data, you can see from 2019 to 2022, the meeting and exceeding category. So in 2019, it's 41%, and in 2022 is 45%. So we do have a bit of a positive trend in the ELA category for grade 7. In math, in 2019 to 2022, it's a bit of a decline. Again, I'm comparing like testing environments. So I'm going back to 2019 because that was the same as 2022. We are in very good shape. If I look at grade 7, we're in very good shape post-pandemic for recovering. These are scores that we can definitely recover from. That was achievement. The next one is growth. These charts show we want to go to the top right-hand corner. We want achievement to increase and growth to increase. Growth target score is about 50%, 50 SGP or higher. You can see for grade 7 for ELA, we're achieving high, but our growth is achieving higher, and our growth is higher than the state. However, that is a change of negative single digits from 2019, again recoverable. And the same thing in math, we are achieving higher, and our SGP isn't higher than the state because that's at 50, but we are still recoverable because our change from 2019 is still in the single digits. When we start talking double digits, then those numbers are a little bit difficult to recover from. So, and then we can look at our subgroups for grade 7. Now, the low income subgroup used to be called the economically disadvantaged. So moving forward, I will have, this is the baseline data for low income. They changed the low income criterion. They actually broadened the definition so that more kids would fit in. And next year we'll have historical trends over time. So you can see that for low income, 24% are meeting and exceeding that total group overall. And then for students with disabilities, you can see overall we have 9% meeting and exceeding. So they're low numbers. We definitely have some work to do with our subgroups, but the idea is to get a positive trend from, if you look at 2019 for special ed to 2022, the total score is very much different, is increased by 9%. So there is a positive trend in those for special ed. So we went up 9% of students from 2019 to 2022. So that's a positive trend in a time of pandemic times. So, all right, now we look at our math subgroups. Again, no historical data, but 24% for our low-income students met or exceeded, and then for, that's 34%. My eyes are playing games on me. And then for math, we went from 19% in 2019 to 18%, so it's comparable results there. If we're looking at, again, we're comparing apples to oranges because it's a totally different group of students. Usually with accountability, we would compare apples to apples. We're comparing the same group of kids. Grade 8, again, your target columns would be your meeting and exceeding categories in your achievement percentile. Target score 70%. For grade 8, we're right around that target number. In fact, in mathematics and science and technology, we're above that, which is wonderful. If you look at the historical over time, it's a slight decline in ELA from 2019 to 2022, but not significant. And then the same thing in math, it's a slight decline, but not significant. And our subgroups, our achievement and growth, you can see that circle, the green circle is moving in the right direction for both ELA and math. There is a slight decline from 2019 results, again, single digits, nothing to be overly alarmed about. We know we can recover those declines. And then our subgroups. For ELA subgroups, again, no comparison with low income, but we have 35% meeting and exceeding. And there is a slight decrease with students with disabilities from 17% of meeting exceeding to 9% overall. And our math grade 8 subgroups, comparable for the students with disabilities from 2019 to 2022, and 34% as our baseline for grade 8 math subgroups and subgroup of low income moving forward. Any questions with 7th and 8th grade? We know we have improvement opportunities. I'll turn that over to Mr. Sturgis, who will speak on what he's working on this year with his staff and students.
We're just simplifying it, looking at writing. It's clear, and when you look at the breakdown data that's not up here, the details is kids struggle to write, so a lot of our scores dipped in the ELA, math, and science and technology test when they have writing prompt questions. But part of the issue is also, which all of our departments spent curriculum time, and will throughout the year looking at this, is cross-curricular writing assignments and projects. So trying to mix project-based learning with writing. Everything is writing now. We're trying to write across everything. But also, as kids need to learn how to write now on the computer, because we had a lot of old-fashioned drafts, first draft, second draft, hack it up the way I actually would rather it be done. For them to learn how to write properly, then it doesn't translate into a computer-typed response for an MCAS question. Now everything's computer-based, so we're actually set some goals. Our English department goal actually targets writing, also writing on the computer, because as much as the kids are advanced in technology, they know more than I do about cell phones and things like that. The writing component, proper grammatical writing and typing, is not necessarily their strength. So getting them not to put LOL in MCAS responses is something we're working on. But all in all, the scores were for what we had to deal with last year, I felt were really good scores this year. And a lot of the numbers that were off, that seemed off higher or lower, were because kids shifted from either a subgroup from not meeting expectations to are now partially meeting. A partially meeting kid moved up, and it shifted around, so they balanced out to an increase. And part of the issue is in 2019 our math scores are very high, so there's not much growth you can do when the bar was set pretty high in 2019, and then you threw COVID into the mix. So we're really focused in all departments. Social studies, science, and math are now also focusing on writing. So that is definitely a school-wide focus, including exploratory classes as well.
So now we move to grade 10, senior high first before vocational. Again, we compare to the state for ELA, math, and science in grade 10, and by far in all categories we're doing very well. Our achievement percentiles are well above the 70% in the last category. And our historical data, although declined from 2019 to 2022, 71% in both content areas are meeting and exceeding in ELA and math. Now, we know we see numbers higher than that by grade 10, but still, in the time of COVID, these are very healthy numbers. No pun intended, but they are. Good shape for post-pandemic. If we look at growth, you can see in ELA, we are definitely shifting to the top right-hand corner where we have a healthy growth and achievement above 50% and high achievement. However, in math, where our achievement is high, but our growth is low. So again, once you get to higher order thinking, it's very hard to continue that. Once you hit that high achievement, it's hard to also get that high growth. And this is a little different, the change over time. We do have, if you look down at the bottom, the -5, we do have positive increases for -5, positive 12%, and then for math, we have 15 and 11%. Very good numbers for the time that we were instructing students. Our subgroups, there's no comparability with both low income and special ed. Low income, again, because it's a new category, but special ed, you need to have a number of 20 or higher, a number of students in a category for it to be recorded. So that's why this page looks a little bleak, but these numbers can change every year from year to year, so it's nice to be able to follow those subgroups. And the math subgroup, same thing. We're just keeping the record for this year being the baseline. Low population and students with disabilities. Vocational school varies. It's very different from the high school. This is where our special ed population actually sits. You'll see in the next page. If we compare to the state, we're running quite below, and our achievement percentiles are definitely low achieving. The historical is same thing, a negative trend over time. In 2019, for students, all group students was 50% meeting exceeding, and then 2022, 31%. So that's historical over time for ELA, and for math, 53% meeting exceeding to 38%. Which again, low achievement, low growth in this case. So we want to work on targeting students' needs and being able to address their gaps in ELA and math. Our subgroups look different here because the number of students included are very different. Our special ed is comparable to 2019. 11% meeting and exceeding in 2019 and 12% in 2022. Not much change, but comparable. For math groups, the historical, again, very comparable, 17% meeting and exceeding and 16% in 2022. So, and now our improvement opportunities for the high school, Mr. Yep.
So one thing we do is we build into grants tutoring for students who historically do not pass MCAS and looking into 11 and 12. So most recently we had the retests for math and ELA, and we were able to provide tutoring for any student who was willing to do that. We had two professionals teaching those kids after school, and we hope that that yields some results. We do a test item analysis, and thank God for Edwin Analytics, because any of us who have been in the business long enough, we used to use a program called TestWiz, which was so not user-friendly. And so what we do is we literally go through the ELA, the science, math, we identify each question, we look at a baseline of 55%. So if 55% of the kids didn't answer that question correctly, we then pull out the question, we pull out the correct answers, we look at how the question is asked. Some of the stuff that's gleaned from this in the past is literally sitting down with the curriculum supervisor for math and showing an example of a question and saying, although it's really improper English and you would never ask a question this way, MCAS does. So you really need to start using that type of a language, teaching the kid how to decode the question. So we go through that. We also look at the kids who have done poorly. If we look at their math trajectory, what have they had for classes over time, and look at any previous MCAS scores to give teachers areas where these students are going to need some help. I will say that tech specifically, the pandemic has really hurt tech kids because teachers had to double up on the skill sets within tech, even though there's a crosswalk of embedded academics in tech for English, science, and math. Those were less focused on because we need to catch up over the pandemic and going from the remote to the hybrid and everything else. So that was just crazy. And as Jody's talked about, there is a huge difference in the population for both low-income, low-income EL and also the special ed students with disabilities. And the other thing we looked at is we put in to the high school the Learning Lab. The Learning Lab is a really concentrated, I would say, tutoring on a daily basis for students who are in general ed, not special ed kids. Those kids normally would have tutorial. We've included that this year, and we've seen the teacher who's doing that, Ms. Ducharme, is doing a phenomenal job targeting, setting goals with kids, and we're seeing improvements in the class. We are expanding that opportunity come the spring for more kids to be able to get that class and to help them out, to support them. So that's kind of what we're looking at the high school. I think the test item analysis is a huge thing because statewide the ELA scores were down, that's atypical. Those are usually where the grades have either peaked or plateaued, and we saw statewide those numbers went down. So I think that goes back to a lot of what Greg talked about, is kids were just not writing. And credit to the teachers for everything they did during all of that COVID time. And I think as educators, we all knew there was going to be learning loss. I think the bigger loss is the social emotional loss. And some of these kids, it's before we can worry about conjugating verbs and solving equations, it's really getting them back in the game, because they're just, their maturity level over the past couple of years is really, really, really stunted. And I think any of you who have kids probably see that, and in education we see that on a daily basis. So it's really kind of building back the whole child to get them ready for the testing.
And then, so we've been kind of comparing apples to oranges. Now we can compare apples to apples. We can take our current 10th grade cohort group and look back to their testing year in 2019, which is our last two slides. So we can actually look at a cohort group with our current data. 2019, if you look at the in grade 7, scored 42% meeting and exceeding in grade 7 for ELA, and in 2022, grade 10, they scored 53% meeting and exceeding. So this is the truest we're going to get to a cohort group at Tantasqua. We know there are other students who have trickled in, but it's the closest we're going to get. So we see that the trend is higher, 11 points higher than it was back in their 7th grade year, which is remarkable. 11 percentage points. And then in math, we can see just the opposite. In 7th grade, they tested very well. In 10th grade, it went down by 4 percentage points. They had 60% meeting and succeeding, and the combined population of tech and high school is 56% meeting and exceeding, which is a downward trend of 4%. That's the closest we'll get to the cohort group. Any questions?
Any questions? Yeah.
So is there any mechanism for giving feedback to the state about the MCAS test in terms of questions that are poorly worded or just nonsensical in the way that they're taught?
Yes. And there have been several questions looked at and actually been even taken off as a result of how they word it. But yes, there is a feedback.
So it's worth a while doing that. Great, thank you.
Any other questions for Mrs. Barassa? Thanks, Jody.
You're welcome.
Good update. Brings us to unfinished business, of which there is none. We have no other new business, public access. Hi, Eric.
Eric's turn.
Closed open forum.
Mr. Chair. I have some public forum business.
Yes, Mr. Hadley.
Well, I understand that you're on a diet.
So does everybody else.
We also recognize that you're celebrating your 38th birthday, so we wanted to just provide you with this little memento of our sincere appreciation and help you with your weight loss.
Thank you very much. Yeah, this is. I guess I'll have to eat it. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Haggerty. It does smell good. Crack into this. All right, well, I'm not gonna keep everybody here for me, so with that, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Second.
It's been made by Mrs. Panic, seconded by Ms. Cunningham. All those in favor of the motion will say aye.
Aye.
Happy Thanksgiving, everyone.
If you want your pass to the Thanksgiving football game, come on over and see me.